Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Maietta, president of ResearchTalk, and we are about to continue our series, Research Talks, Qualitative Scholar Conversations. We're here today with our guest of honor, Rob Kozinets, and he is talking to us about a course he's teaching this summer at our summer intensive titled Netnography Essentials, a structured approach to qualitative digital research. That will be offered Wednesday and Thursday, July 31st and August 1st. So I want to introduce who's here with me, and then we'll cue to Rob to start a story that we'll guide through as we talk for a little bit here today. So one of my colleagues with me today is Paul Mihas. And Paul, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Ray. I am the Assistant Director of Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research at UNC Chapel Hill at an institute called the Odum Institute for Research in Social Science. And I've also been a consultant with ResearchTalk since 2001. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Jeff?
Yes, I'm Jeff Petruzzelli with ResearchTalk, and I'm a qualitative research specialist here, and I've been with ResearchTalk since 2001 as well.
2001 was a very good year for us. And we wanted, Rob, just as you introduce yourself, tell us also a little bit about your, who you are, those kinds of things professionally. And if you could include a bit about your evolution as a qualitative researcher, that would be great.
Sure. So let me first say it's a pleasure speaking with you and being here today. It's also a pleasure to have three other qualitative scholars on the call, because that's like unusual for me. So my field is marketing, and marketing is a very multidisciplinary field, but it's multidisciplinary in a way that's qualitative is very much a minority. We're very sort of small percentage-wise group. It's really dominated by economists and psychologists. And so I started my my foray into academia actually with an interest in economics and psychology. I come from a business background. I'm an undergrad in business and an MBA. And I worked with one of my former professors and became really interested in the research career and the life of researchers, and went back to get my PhD, fully intending to do a psychological scale that would measure organizational culture and organizational values. So I was actually an OB guy, organizational behavior, and a psychology psychometrics type of researcher. Along the way, I discovered marketing and was inspired by the guy, Steve Arnold, who actually became my supervisor, and a number of other people. John Dowling, who had been one of the co-founders of institutional theory, taught us ethnography, and I became enchanted with that. And as it came time to be do a dissertation, I got to pick one of two fields, actually, OB or marketing, and I chose marketing, and ended up doing a dissertation on Star Trek fans. And I was very interested in what Star Trek could teach us as marketers about brand longevity and brand loyalty, because this was a community at the time, 35 years, now we're going on 60. 35-year-old fan community that was still highly devoted to the series. Very popular new series called The Next Generation was just on. This was like 1995 when I was doing this. And I started studying fans, and it turned out that the fans were also using technology. So I had funding to go to different conventions. So I was traveling to Star Trek conventions. I was also a member of a local Star Trek fan community in Toronto, where I was living at the time when I was doing my PhD. And they told me, oh, if you really want to go to conventions, the best convention of all is online. It's on something called Prodigy, which some of you guys might remember. GE had an online service called Prodigy. And along with CompuServe, it was one of the top private servers. And at the time, the internet, as we know it, was just sort of emerging through the World Wide Web, because we had access to this brand new invention called Netscape. So I had discovered Netscape in my university library and thought, oh, this is interesting, and typed in Star Trek. But 10,000 hits came out at the time, which was crazy. Star Trek fans were all online. I thought, wow, this is a lot of really interesting conversation. How can I use this kind of data? And that set me down this path of thinking about, how do we do work that's true to ethnographic work, the ethnography stuff that I was doing as a fan club member and traveling around North America, going to different Star Trek conventions, but also extend that into the online world where there were a lot of conversations that were happening at people's convenience, and constantly. So Star Trek fans were this group that was online very early, and they were sort of, in a way, the lead users. They were the early users of the internet that were pioneering how to do this stuff, and I kind of followed along in their wake. And so as I started writing about this stuff, people were very interested in the fandom stuff, but they were also really interested in the method too. And so I got a number of people, qualitative scholars, that small, tight community of qualitative scholars that was in consumer research and marketing, which is my native field, was saying, why don't you build up that method so other people can use it, be a little more specific about what you're doing, and how it's rigorous and why it's valid and why other people should care. And so this is 1996, 97, 98. I'm presenting this stuff and honing this, and got an opportunity to develop it within the field of marketing then. And so as I moved into beyond Star Trek and cultural studies and communication media kinds of topics, I started to think about, well, there's a lot of people who are online who are talking about brewing their own beer. There's a lot of people who are talking about wine tasting. There's a bunch of people who are really into coffee. So I started collecting data, a bunch of gamers. So I started collecting on a lot of these different things. And I ended up writing a methodology piece, which ended up, after a number of rounds and a lot of resistance from the field, getting published in a top journal called the Journal of Marketing Research. And I had some champions there who I owe a lot to, like Russ Weiner, who really encouraged me to do that early on. And that one looked, in the end, it looked at coffee culture and how coffee, aficionados and connoisseurs were using online to up the level of taste and to discuss the perfect cup of espresso. And so there was this application now, and basically, prefiguring a lot of the connoisseur market kind of stuff that happened with Starbucks very, very early on. And so this, this applied sense of netnography started to come out, and this terminology and this methodology around that. And, I, as a methodological and qualitative research scholar, kind of was pretty much from the beginning of my academic career, both building the tool and applying the tool at the same time. So, I had seen other people do fan studies like Henry Jenkins, who's become, a lifelong mentor and friend and now co-author. But he was doing an early version of this, and just basically saying, I'm doing ethnography online. There's a lot of amazing data. It's an incredible way to find out how people relate to television programs and each other through their conversation around television programs online. And there's this great source of data. And then I was like, okay, what did he do? Let's reverse engineer this. Let's add, some necessary elements which needed to be added there. So that's, long story, just a little bit longer. That's a little bit about my origins as a qualitative researcher and as a methodologist who kind of invented the tools around this thing called the internet and browsers as they were emerging and becoming widely available to us.
This is wonderful. And we envision, when we think about this video, folks who are doing and interested in digital research, popping in and reading it, but of course, folks who will be taking courses at the summer intensive, figuring out what they'll take. So what you've done already is just really set us along in our conversation today.
Okay.
And some of the stuff we're curious about is, and I feel like this is probably married for you in these two issues. One is the course itself and kind of how that came to be and take shape. But more so, it just seems as you're talking, listening to you, that it's so linked to what you've been doing in your experience, as you've already started to tell us, you've been writing. So it seems like the course probably has co-evolved with the approach. I don't know, Paul and Jeff, if you have anything specific, but I love what you've offered so far. I just kind of, I want to give you permission to continue this conversation about the co-evolution of those two. And, if we can get to a point where we give people a picture of what to expect over the 2 days, that's beautiful. But let me just see, Paul, Jeff, anything more directive before we give it back to Rob to keep telling us these stories of how things have moved along and what they look like now?
Sure. I guess I'm kind of interested in how, as we all know, qualitative research does a great job of looking at holism as well as like micro and fragments. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how netnography kind of embraces all of those different lenses.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Paul. Thank you. I mean, I talk a lot about this idea that it actually came from the Canadian foreign minister was saying that in order to understand the world now, you need to have a telescope in one hand and a microscope in the other. And I thought, wow, that's a great metaphor for the kind of work that we do as qualitative scholars. And I think, as an ethnographer, I was an ethnographer first. Like I was an ethnographer for like a year, and then it was like, okay, moving online now as I'm following where my field work takes me. And you try and understand a culture in context, right? Like you're always looking at contexts. So I always think of, when I'm doing my qualitative work, the embeddedness of what we're looking at. So every conversation, every word we're using here, even the notion of qualitative research itself is embedded in these cultural concepts, right? Like I kind of started out by talking about the culture that I'm used to in marketing, which is that I'm like a minority. Like I'm a very sort of I have to do a lot of explaining to legitimize what I do among a group of people who see the legitimacy of numbers as linked to the culture of science. And anything that is not hard and quantitative is a little bit fuzzy and something not to be trusted. Well, those are all just examples of this embeddedness, right? This cultural context. But when I'm also doing ethnographic interview, an individual item, I just happen to have my Star Trek mug here, can be with blueprints on it, which reckons back to the original, the Star Trek blueprints and the engineering focus and the aesthetics of the USS Enterprise and many things that we can take really, really deep dives into, right? That we can analyze in this very, very micro way, snippets of conversation, what someone has on their desk, a book on their bookshelf. That's the joy of this. And so I think with netnography, what happens, the way this translates is that we have this sort of a wide scope of social media, where at the beginning we'll look at a lot of different data. So at the beginning, as I'm going to talk about in the course, we'll scope out, generally we'll have a research question and then scope out multiple platforms and see what's going on across, what's happening on Discord, what's happening on Reddit, what's happening on TikTok, what's happening on Instagram, all of these different things. What are the hashtags? who are the big influencer players in this space, or, whatever it is that we're looking at. And then we start to dive down and maybe we're going to focus for a certain amount of time on a particular influencer or even on one post. And then we can get into that one post and its hashtags. We can analyze that. We can click through if there were links. We can look at an image. We can, do a deep semiotic dive into a particular image. And so it is this macroscope and this microscope connection that we really, I think netnography really allows you to play in that space. And I call this, the dive into those specific things, I call it a deep data, like not looking at big data, but looking at deep data, looking for rich cultural contexts that are elaborated through online posts, say, or it could be through immersive experience as well. And then we would unpack the various elements of that. And of course, it's like, Russian dolls or unpacking an onion. There's always layers and layers and layers within, and then linking that to some larger question often becomes part of the fun and part of the goal. But I think it's that I hope that directly answers your question, because I think it really that framing of it really resonates with me a lot.
Well, thanks. That's great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and this
Yeah.
detail and nuance is great because it clearly shows the links to what ethnography is, the special nature of what we do as qualitative inquiry experts
Yeah.
is we not only give permission, but honor detail and nuance and how it shapes things. We talk about lived experience, but as you're speaking, I really see how this is folks' days, whether you're talking to folks who are coffee aficionados, Trekkies, whatever it might be, what is their lived space? How are they navigating in that? And you really, what you outline and what you'll discuss in the course really does follow that along within an environment that folks don't always pay mindedness to, and you and others are really guiding us to. But when we think about what we're doing a lot of the day, it's not just where we're sitting, it's what's in front and around us. And the digital space is real.
There's, so much of our lives are spent now in front of screens, as we are all spending our time now. And it's social connection, but it's also how many people read, how many people get their news. Everything moves through online spaces for a lot of people. And so I think that if we don't have access to that as qualitative researchers, we're missing out on a big part of what people's daily lives are now and their experiences. I always feel like if you're an ethnographer and you stop at the door of what happens after the person sort of sits, you sort of say, okay, and then they sat down at the keyboard, and then ... 8 hours later, they went to the kitchen. Well, those 8 hours, that's pretty essential stuff for a lot of the things that we're really interested in. Let's say as marketers or as social science scholars, right? We're really curious about what's going on in your social life and into your intellectual life and with your emotional engagements. And how about your political ideologies? I mean, so much of that is filtered through these online information exchanges and conversations. So, one way of thinking about online data, and it's certainly a very valid way, is that it is text, or it is image, and it is sort of content, right? That it can be coded, it can be classified, it can be put into different buckets. Now AI, can help with that. Before it was natural language processing and dictionaries. But what netnography does and has always done is focus not on online material as text or content, but to focus it as conversation and as lived experience, as you're saying, as an element of lived experience. And that changes everything, because now we're really interested in those Russian dolls, right? All of those contexts, we open up to meanings, we open up to the exchange of values. And I think, so much big data work has been done that I think now people are realizing where it stops too, and where big data can't explain really important questions. And that's where netnography starts. Is it asking those tricky questions and then designing research that fits into that? So, as I will talk about in the class, netnography from the beginning has intersected and included other qualitative methods. It's not just about finding data on social media. That is certainly one, movement, as we call it, of netnography. But there's also an interaction element there where you do interviews, or you can give people tasks like doing digital diaries, or have them do mobile ethnography, which is really an up and coming method of its own that I think people would be interested in. So it's, in a way, netnography has become this umbrella term for building an understanding of what happens in this technologically mediated cultural communication experience that people have with one another and with technology itself. And now, and I'm I'm foreshadowing and jumping ahead a little bit. A big part of that experience is now involving chatbots and AI agents. And so the kind of conversations that people are having with AI perfectly fits into the rubric of how you investigate using netnography. Those elements are there. So I was asked, 5 years ago, people were saying, oh, everything's bots now on Twitter. So how can we use Twitter data? We don't know who's posting. And my answer has always been, it doesn't matter who's posting. That's the environment. We're studying a qualitative environment. We're looking at what's out there, and that's the landscape. And so if the landscape now starts to become more and more populated by virtual agents, which have some sort of agency of their own, well, it's very important that we understand, what that landscape is and how it works, and also how people react to it, of course. And for human reactions, we would study human beings. We would be doing interviews with people, and hopefully they're not replaced by virtual agents that are such deep fake perfect that we can't tell them from one another. We're not there yet.
Right.
But we find ways to track the human experience within the technological one with netnography, rather than sort of assume that we are getting some sort of a true person who has posted here. That's not the point. So analytically, we move beyond that because we can be subtle in our analysis to say, okay, here, this is the rhetoric, this is the narrative, this is the landscape of discourse, rather than to say, oh, we're going to assume that these are people. We can't do that.
Yeah. When you were talking earlier and you were framing this piece, you said, well, we can say they came in, they sat down at the keyboard, but that's not the end of the story. That's really where it really flows. And the parallels to what we do in any environment, again, are so strong. And I think about folks who want to explore decision-making and choices. And what that assumes is that those are always explicit. Oftentimes people assume that those are diagrammed and known ahead, and they ignore kind of places people get. And the internet is such a great example of, I flowed and I was here and I'm here. And if you ask about their journey, they may or may not be aware. And there are experiences in our own day-to-day lives that before we played with the internet, that we saw that, and kind of the expected and not expected, the acknowledged, not acknowledged movements. It's just such a tremendously rich environment.
Oh yeah.
Contained
Yeah. Things.
Ellen,
This
yeah.
decision making is incredibly spontaneous and complex now. I think
Yeah.
whenever I work with students or other researchers and they talk about motivation, I'm like, I don't know. That construct doesn't speak to me anymore. As a PhD student, it sort of made some sense, but now I don't. I just like you're saying, I don't think that we can put agency on someone and say, oh, this is why they were motivated to do that. Here's why did you do that? If I ask you, Ray, why are you involved in qualitative research? You're going to give me your usual story. But the fact might be that, there was genetic heritage that started 16 generations ago, which led to you being the way that you are, which really was, you almost had no choice. So I don't know if you've seen the Dune movies, but Paul Atreides, he didn't have much choice. He pretty much had to do what he had to do. And I think a lot of the time we really, really underestimate the situational forces on other people, and certainly on ourselves, that lead us to the paths that we end up taking.
That's what you mentioned, the Dune movies. Jeff knows this, Paul might, but I just finished the first Dune. So
Oh yeah.
prepping for Dune 2, I wanted to make sure that I had the first movie.
Oh yeah, don't miss it. I'm already reading Dune Messiah. I'm getting ready for the third movie. So
Oh, it's great. And Timothy Chalamet, it's amazing to think about, not to get off track, but the journey, and he just plays that part so well, but he also plays Willy Wonka and
oh yeah.
Call Me by Your Name. It's like,
Oh yeah, and the fact that these parts are available now is also, that situation also chose him a little bit too.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jeff, kind of watching your nonverbal, all this stuff, let me invite you to let us know what's on your mind.
Yeah, Rob, I was looking through your description a little bit, and you have a section, a topic you mentioned, challenges and advanced techniques. And I was just wondering, what are some of the challenges that you deal with as a netnographer, as you mentioned in the description, working with private and closed social networks, but also, dealing with maybe sensitive topics, areas that are kind of hard to dig into. So how do you kind of overcome those challenges through the method?
Yeah, I mean, look, so I've been doing this for 28 years. So, we've had roadblocks all along the way, and great questions all the time. So one of the big areas that I think a lot of people in this area have to deal with is ethics. How do you deal with private data? And so we've come up with different ways of knowing what to avoid, knowing what to embrace openly, where you don't necessarily need informed consent. The rules were very unclear at the beginning, and now we really do know what they are. And then knowing where there are middle grounds that we can, potentially find some wiggle room where we still maintain anonymity and confidentiality, but we're able to study things that other kinds of methods would find a lot more difficult. And so, my Netnography book, which is 480 pages of advice and compressed knowledge around this, there's probably 150 or so pages that are dedicated in one way or another to research ethics kinds of questions in this area, because it's ended up being so important. There are interpretation challenges which we are still figuring out, but I think we've got a much better handle on it, of how to treat the different kinds of data in ethnography different. There's an ongoing challenge here of how to keep digital research ethnographic rather than having it, and I'm sorry to my colleagues who do content analysis, but I'm going to use the verb anyways, have it devolve into content analysis, which, I don't think content analysis is bad, but it's not ethnography, right? They are two very different ways of seeing the world, and they often in ethnography become very, very confused. And so there's there are lots of challenges, Jeff, that I could get into. Another one is explaining what this is that you're doing to people, to others who want to understand the research. So IRBs have been a big challenge, and scholars being able to answer the difficult IRB questions that come down when you say that you're doing online ethnographic research. Is this human subjects research? Is it not human subjects research? How does consent work? And informing that and having a background for that are really key. And now, as I mentioned, with a world of chatbots, with this, metaverse kind of concept, which we got lots of these virtual reality worlds, how do we study those? How do we adapt those methods? And how does the voice of the researcher get incorporated in a way into the research so that it does have that reflective human quality? Building all of those things in and having methodological operations that are tried and true, and that we can basically put in a checklist, rather than say, oh, you're just doing ethnography, just do ethnography online. That didn't work for me, and it doesn't work for many scholars and students. And that's why I've spent pretty much my whole career specifying out, do this, don't do that, here's a structure, here's where it moves. And now there are hundreds of other people who are doing this, who are adding to this and building on it. So although I started the train rolling, there's a lot of tracks and a lot of different directions being piloted by a lot of different people now. And that's really, really exciting, and new challenges all the time, right? The big one is, this one that I mentioned and alluded to before, is how do I know, that that's human data and not chat GPT created data? And there's a number of answers to that, and there's also an embrace of the fact that is the new reality out there, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but is another research opportunity for us.
Yeah, definitely. So there are two more things explicit that we just want to check in with you on.
Sure.
And I'll see if our, Jeff and Paul have anything before we come to a close. But one of them is for the folks who take the course, if you could kind of give us just rough your vision of kind of, not too much on necessarily the before, but when you think, okay, they're interested in these kinds of areas, their question brings them naturally to the environments you've been talking about throughout. Once they finish your course, if you were to envision them at work, what do you see as what they might be doing differently as a result of spending 2 days with you and their colleagues, learning more and thinking more about netnography essentials?
Yeah, I mean, the goal here is to pack as much as we can into 2 days of learning, where they're going to come out from this understanding not only what netnography is, but I think how to start and how to do a netnography. And that they'll have the basic procedural tools that they need to understand what this method is, how it's different from other methods, how it works, and some of the key things that they need to remember about how to conduct it procedurally and ethically, what boxes they need to check. So I've prepared this course to take someone who really knows next to nothing or nothing at all about netnography and have them at the end, hopefully give them the tools and the courage to jump in there, jump in the water and do one and see how it goes. Because if you are a qualitative researcher and you understand qualitative research, you've got those data analysis tools, pretty well in hand. So I'm not going to go into data analysis. A lot of the courses that you teach are about different forms of data analysis. Well, this is really a focus on collection. It's a focus on data collection. So thinking about how you use that telescope, how you use that microscope, and what sort of things you need to keep in mind when you're interpreting it later, for sure, but not how to interpret it, just how to think about interpreting it and how to conduct that and do it in a way that is thorough, that's efficient, that's rigorous, and that's ethical.
And the other areas, your background is interesting in so many levels. And one of the things that you do a lot of is float in the academic world and industry back and forth with those. We increasingly see folks across disciplines finding themselves navigating that, of course, government as well. But I just was hoping, we were talking about this before, if you could just talk a little bit about navigating within and between those worlds of academia and industry, and what takeaways that doing that has resulted in for you.
Closing with a big question. Yeah, I like it, Ray. So yeah, I being a business academic from the beginning, getting my MBA, getting a PhD in a business field, and then going to work teaching MBAs and business students how to do this. The applied part has always been a big part of what I've done. So the coffee culture one, it ended up with takeaways for people who are in the coffee and the food service industry, right? Like it was netnography looking at people online and thinking about new product development. That was really the initial application that sort of got this methodologically started. Well, I got invited to a group pretty early in my career, 2000, and I think it was 2006, when people were starting to jump on board social media. I didn't call it social media yet. It was still virtual communities, but there was blogs, there was, Facebook had started a year ago, Twitter had started. So all of these things were coming on board that were kind of, interesting and getting people's attention in the news, mostly blogs at that time. And I think Second Life was also maybe on the horizon for those of you who are, virtual reality nostalgia buffs. But I got invited to this group called the Marketing Science Institute, whose job was to bring together marketing academics and working marketers. And I presented, what netnography was and what I thought it could do. And there were a couple people in the audience who were really interested. One of them was from Campbell Soup, and the other one was from Merck, the pharmaceutical company. And they both hired me to do applied netnographies on questions that they were interested in that sphere. I actually wrote about the one that I did with Campbell's as an article for the MIT technology review. Anyways, long story, just a wee bit longer. I ended up working with a number of different companies, started a consulting company, and basically wanted to kick the tires on the method as how does this work in an applied sense? Well, that feeds in nicely to my academic work because I was seeing where it was strong, where it needed to be improved, how it could answer big questions in marketing and understanding consumers, and started to develop elements of that and then be able to teach it to other people. So I've run a number of workshops in companies where I talk about netnography, talk about how it could be applied. So I've been teaching this and refining it and applying it for a long time. For me, the world of academic research and applied industry research is a very thin one. I was asked a few years ago to do some work for the state governments here in the US who were suing Juul Labs for advertising their nicotine delivery devices to underage citizens. And so I did a netnography as part of that. So that ended up as part of the case, which never went to trial. Against Juul, and I was an expert witness there, and had done so. It's applicable to so many different areas, including legal work. I think that's really something that's just starting out in a huge high potential area to use netnography in lawsuits and in legal work. So I think I speak for a lot of qualitative research methodologists when I say, the joy of our method is to see how well it's applied in different areas, right? I mean, clearly interviews are something that we find useful across just any possible domain, from a police interrogation to marketing research to deciding who you're going to go on a date with, or hire. Interviews are just an extremely powerful method, and I think a lot of qualitative methods are similar in that way. So I don't see a dividing line, a sharp dividing line about application. It is just a useful tool. The more times you try and apply it, the more you can refine that tool and make it stronger, I think, for all applications.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When we talk, Paul and Jeff and I, about the summer intensive, about our professional development, one of our many kind of principles or missions is thinking about ways to use qualitative methods to expand our opportunities to learn and enhance our practice.
Yeah.
It's just such a wonderful fit to have this topic. We're really excited. The clock moves fast enough. I don't want to rush it, but it will be.
Yeah. Wow, that went fast. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's great. I wanted to just see if there's any comment or question that Paul or Jeff have in general, or for Rob, and then we will give you the rest of your afternoon.
Oh, it's all good.
Well, I just wanted to say that this conversation has really piqued my interest and curiosity, and I'm just really looking forward to the course.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Absolutely. I second that.
Thank you, Jeff.
And Rob, do you want to wrap up for us? Anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, it's as I said, it's really a pleasure. For me, it's just a joy to talk to people who are interested in qualitative research, because I've spent a lot of my career talking to people who are not interested in qualitative research about qualitative research. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm also really looking forward to broadening the potential audience for netnography. It's part of an ongoing initiative that we've been doing. We recently had a mini track at Hicks, the first one dedicated to netnography, which is a system science and computer science conference that's held every year in Hawaii. We're going to have another one coming up in 2025. We've got an annual netnography conference, which is just getting off the ground, and an association for netnographic research. So this is all part of a growing community. That's the other appeal, I think, is learning this method and working with this method can bring you into contact with a wonderful and pretty young a community of scholars who are interested in building netnography and building the profile of ethnographic, high quality, rigorous qualitative research in digital environments. So it's just a really exciting time to be doing this kind of research and an exciting time to be alive, I think. So yeah, it's great.
It's beautiful. We talk a lot to people we work with who come in thinking quant versus qual, mixed methods versus qual, ethnography versus interviews, and all these things. And we try to push the envelope on something that seems like what you just described as
Yeah,
let's have a community for cooperative scholarship.
absolutely.
And it seems like that's exactly right in the zone of your mission as well.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
well, this was wonderful. It was
Thanks
great.
so much.
Look forward to continuing and enjoy your weekend. We'll talk more, I'm sure.
Thanks so much. Take care. Good to speak to all of you.
All right.